powerful people throughout history who sold their soul to the devil. Coming in at number 5, Warren Jeffs. Although now he's in prison serving a life sentence for his crimes, members of the FLDS still consider Jeffs the leader and prophet, believing he was wrongly convicted, which is insane if you know the backstory. So the FLDS, or Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is an extreme denomination of the Mormon Church that separates itself entirely from secular life. Their belief is that in order to get into the highest rank of heaven, you must have at least 3 wives. But realistically, the more you have, the better in their eyes. Now, there is a lot to unpack with this entire denomination. Honestly, I could write a whole video on it alone. But essentially, under Warren Jeffs' leadership, the FLDS came under fire as a hate group and a funnel for underage marriages. Prior to his arrest, it was believed that Warren had 87 wives, many of which were not of legal age to marry, and he was not the only one to be in a similar situation. Using the excuse that it was God's will, he routinely married off young teenage girls with very old men, and even created a temple to have his way with any girl he pleased. Ironically, while this was happening, he was sneaking off the commune to gamble, pay for sexual services, and romp around the secular world, living the life he preached was sinful, while committing actual sins in his own community.
In our number 4 spot today, we have Giuseppe Tartini. Okay, so this story is one that is kind of similar to Nicolo's, but even more strange. Giuseppe was an Italian violinist and composer who lived during the 1700s. He went on to compose a song called The Devil's Trill Sonata, and not only this, but he also claimed to wake up one night to find Satan sitting on the edge of his bed playing the violin. It seems as though the devil really likes violins, apparently. What's extremely curious is after this alleged encounter, it is said that Giuseppe's violin skills hit heights never seen before. He was able to suddenly play extremely complicated trills that are impossible for most musicians, and apparently even today the sonata is too difficult for many musicians to play, which is why people believe that perhaps this story really was true.
Coming in at number 3, Idi Amin. Once the president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979, Idi Amin was and still is regarded as one of the most brutal despots in modern world history. Prior to his reign over the country, Amin was the commander of the Ugandan army, but as one might have guessed, he was not really following all the rules. In fact, the president at the time, Milton Obote, was actually planning to arrest Amin for misuse of army funding. However, somehow this news made its way back to Amin, and he hatched a plan to overthrow the elected government via a military coup and declare himself the president. Unfortunately, this plan worked. Under his malicious reign, his first order of business was to expel the entirety of the Asian population, which was roughly 80,000 people, many of whom were dual citizens. This complete intolerance and persecution of any and all ethnic groups continued under his dictatorship, along with rampant human rights abuses, political repression, and extrajudicial killing. In fact, it's estimated that nearly 300,000 civilians lost their lives in the mere 8 years he ruled over the country. Finally, in 1979, the Tanzanian president ordered his troops to capture him, which they did, ousting him from his power. But rather than face his charges, Amin went into exile in Saudi Arabia, where he remained until his death.
In our number 2 spot today, we have Christoph Heisman. Back in 1677, Christoph was an artist who was working on a castle in Austria. He was so talented at his job that he had been commissioned by the nobles to do this work. There were rumblings about how he may have sold his soul to the devil, but no one was sure of it until it was said that Christoph confessed. He said he had 9 years prior and that he regretted it very much now and actually wanted an exorcism. They demanded to know if he was a practicing witch, but in the end it was decided that he was not, and that instead the devil just had a very strong hold on him. The local priest began giving Christoph exorcisms, and during these sessions, Christoph explained that he had these intense visions where he was coming face to face with the devil, who was in the form of a dragon. The dragon was holding the contract that held Christoph's soul, and this is when he was able to rip it out of the dragon's talons. When he woke up, it seemed as though he was cured. After this, he began painting pictures of the devil, and he even painted a story with multiple panels that told the story of how he sold his soul and how they helped him to get it back.
And last up in our number 1 spot, Pol Pot. Leader of the notoriously cruel communist movement Khmer Rouge from 1975 to 1979, Pol Pot is among some of the most evil leaders in history. During his short but radical rule, the entire country was isolated from all foreign influences. This included closing schools, hospitals, factories, banks, and foreign agriculture, as they believed this would stimulate the rebirth of the country. But of course, all it did was send it into a desolate famine and poverty. The population was forcibly moved to the countryside, where they were ordered to work on collective farms, but with the economy collapsing, people in the country were starving. Still, they could not forage for food. In fact, anyone who disobeyed the orders were killed. Well, actually anyone who was educated or spoke an opposing thought was killed. And in just 4 years, nearly 2 million Cambodians of all ages perished, which was approximately 1/4 of the population. To give you just an idea of the kind of evil this man was capable of, one of the most disgusting practices that took place during his genocidal tyranny was what happened at the Chankiri trees in the killing fields. Innocent sons and daughters whose parents had been killed for a crime against the state were taken to the trees and executed so they could not, and I quote, grow up and take revenge for their parents' deaths. He truly was an evil, evil man.